I should say some segments of the American population, simply refuse to even discuss teaching critical race theory. And as it relates to the 1619 project, President Trump, or former President Trump, said it was dangerous. He never elaborated on what made it dangerous or why he would think that simply teaching history would be dangerous. I mean, dangerous to whom? So, recently there was an incident in Ohio, Springfield, Ohio, where a group of black students forcibly made some of their white classmates admit that or accept Black Lives Matter. Some of these Caucasian students were beaten, right? They were forced to kneel um, before these black students and say, yeah, Black Lives Matter. Now, I don't condone what happened by any means, by any stretch of imagination. Um, what they did was not correct. My question is, what was the motivating factor? What would make them think um, to do such a thing? In this country where our talks on race and even human relations have been disingenuous, have these or do these students feel like they're pushed to that point? I mean, is that possible?
I think they do feel pushed to that point. I think that we're only getting an opportunity to see what they did to the Caucasian, but we're not getting an opportunity to see what those African American children might have lived on a daily basis in that school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they're probably not pushed.
Well, this incident in Springfield, Ohio, is currently being investigated as a hate crime. I found that interesting because we're dealing with elementary school students.
Mm-hmm.
And, this was supposedly a game they were playing. Um, a game? No, it's in their mind it was a game. Clearly it's not. Where you're going to force people into doing something that you want them to do. And uh, using violence or threats of violence. That's not a game to an adult. From a child's perspective, how do they see it? And I'm sure these students that were subjected to these tones and these acts of violence were very much uncomfortable. However, is that a situation that black and brown people in this country have been forced to deal with for over 40 years?
It is. It is. And what happens to this whole concept that we keep exploring that says that when you're below a certain age,
Mhm.
you're not really capable of making rational decisions, right?
Well, according to the law,
Is it only applicable with sex?
no. According to the law, anyone under the age of 7 cannot form the requisite criminal, I guess, mentality in order to understand the repercussions of their actions. So, the 6-year-old that brought a gun to school in Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
he has not been charged and will not be charged because the law says under 7, no criminal culpability. So now you have these students in Ohio, 11 and 12-year-olds. A hate crime is a very serious charge. It's actually an enhancement charge that has been used for the last, 20 years or so. So, can you imagine these kids in elementary school could have to go before a judge and a jury charged with a hate crime? These kids will be going to junior high school with possible serious misdemeanor or felony records. I'm in this country, which again has been so disingenuous with its talks on race or what's called race. I mean, one of the problems we have here in this country is I think the rest of the world kind of recognizes the fact that there is a human race. But in America, we are so hell bent on separating people based on skin color And I think that at certain points, people become desperate. Everybody wants to be heard. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has feelings. Everyone has emotions. And sometimes when you see what is happening in this country, when you see Trayvon Martin, when you see George Floyd, when you see this young man in Memphis that was recently killed in the last couple of months, what does, you know, if you're in elementary school and you see this, or you live in an area where you see things like police brutality, where you see, or you live in poverty, or right at the poverty line, where your parents are constantly struggling just to keep the lights on and keep food in your belly, what messages do these children receive? When you go to school and as a black person, a person of African descent, and you are not acknowledged. I mean, here we are in Black History Month, and how much do we really talk about Black history in schools in this country?
Hmm.
I mean, we essentially talk about Dr. King and the I Have a Dream speech, and it pretty much ends there, right? But there are so many facets to Black history, which is American history, that is not even discussed. And again, going back to what I said earlier, this country adamantly opposes even a discussion on talking about critical race theory. When you have a former president who says that the 1619 Project, which is just the history of Africans being brought to these shores, you say that that is dangerous. What messages are you sending? You know, and so I can just imagine how maybe some of these students felt. You know, I mean, now that's more your area of expertise, right? Um, well, you know, you meet with people, you have patients, right, who you talk to, who may have anxieties, who may have anger issues as it relates to how they're treated in this country, how they feel disregarded. I mean, is it possible that these students felt the same way?
I might have issues, but I'm treated in this country.
Well, we probably don't do. Yeah.
So I would imagine children who haven't really had an opportunity or haven't reached the place of development where they can process the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless they have their verbal parents at home, who, you know, who've taken the time from very small
Mm-hmm.
to explain what goes on in this country. They're probably very confused, probably disheartened. They probably feel less than.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they're exposed to that stuff every day on a daily basis. Some of those kids probably walk away with some horribly beaten up self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention, if you're in a school where you really represent the minority.
Right, right.
Like we raised our children here in the Poconos,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when you and I first came here, we were really fine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I can remember, my sons, one is light like me,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is brown like my mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like my ex-husband's mother. And I can remember the difference in treatment that my kids would get in the same school.
Mm-hmm.
Because one was a little darker than what they were used to,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those were things that, we had to deal with when the kids came home.
Now that's interesting you should say that. Because again, they're investigating this incident as a hate crime.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for there to be a hate crime enhancement, there would have to be something that was said that would something, some threat or something specifically related to race, ethnicity, or gender, right, or sexual orientation.
They said the magic words, Black Lives Matter.
Okay,
They
but
don't want us to say that.
okay, they don't. However, by just saying Black Lives Matter, would that fall under the category of a hate crime?
think they want to place it under the capital.
And see, you just talked about, the difference in treatment. When you have, and this has happened throughout this country, when you have black and brown people attacked, a lot of times there is no hate crime enhancement, right? How long has the Ku Klux Klan been out, terrorizing and killing people of color? And I don't know of a time when they ever been charged with hate crime. Barely charged with crimes, period, right? In the case of someone like Emmett Till, and that's going back, a number of years. We're talking now 68 years since Emmett Till. But the two men that were responsible for killing Emmett Till actually gave an interview to a magazine where they went into detail of what they did to Emmett Till. So they were charged on the state level. And of course, we're talking Mississippi in 1955. So of course, no jury in Money, Mississippi, when this incident occurred, is going to convict a Caucasian man of killing a black child or killing a black person, period. After they were acquitted on the state level, the feds could have stepped in and charged them with civil rights violations. Well, the feds declined to prosecute. No hate crime. Clearly, we saw what was done to Emmett Till. His mother had to fight to have the casket open so that the world could see what was done to her 15-year-old son. There was no talk of hate crime. Nowadays, it's something that we use as an enhancement when you have a crime that shocks the conscience. Does this fit the criteria? In my opinion, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And I don't know. I'm sure neither of us are privy to all of the intricacies of what took place. But knowing that these are 11 and 12-year-olds, and the fact that is it really wrong to say Black Lives Matter? Is it really wrong? And if the roles were reversed, and it had been white kids that forced black kids to say something like all lives matter, right? That could have been the other way around.
Certainly.
Would it have been looked at the same way?
That's a good question. Typically in this country, answers no. I think we all know that. And, I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, lead anyone to believe that we are condoning what these kids did. What they did was wrong, right? I still would like to know what was their motivation? Where did they get this idea from, right? But these are kids, and we expect kids to make mistakes. We all did it, right? And something like that, when no one was seriously harmed, should these children be looking at a hate crime? Years ago, our generation, if two kids got into a fight, no one called the police. The guidance counselor, the principal, teacher came out, broke it up, said, all right, I'm going to call your parents or shake hands and this is over. Nowadays, it becomes, a regular, police are regularly dispatched to these instances of kids getting into a fist fight. We're basically taking kids, young kids, and giving them a police record. And some of these kids in elementary school, junior high school, you expect kids to make mistakes.
Well, I have to be honest with you. What rings in my head when I hear about this situation is that we've discussed on this show a lot of instances where African American people seem to have said something that somebody didn't like, or posted something on social media that somebody didn't like, and now done something in school, which we know if it were our kids, we would discipline them, right? But I think the running theme is that in no instance any of these situations that we've discussed on the show did we ever condone what they did. But the, the running theme was that we had an issue with the consequences and the repercussions and the punishment that was given. And I don't think in any of them did the punishment really fit the crime, right? So I think that's what we, at this point, need to start looking at, when they say, oh, things aren't the way they used to be, that there's equality. Is it really equality?
Well, we entitled the show is DEI, or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Real. And despite the fact that we tout this, you see it around the schools, universities, colleges, you see this. But what's actually changing? Are we a more diverse society? I mean, people said that when Barack Obama was elected, that America was now post-racial, right? That Black people had arrived, that all the ills of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, well, all that is behind us now, right? And that, we no longer have to have things like affirmative action or some of these other programs that were geared toward, I guess, granting some level of equality to people, to the descendants of those who were enslaved. But is that in any way true?
No, not true.
I mean, the reality is it's almost laughable to say that, we've reached that point in America when, we just saw George Floyd, right, a couple of years back. The man is crying out for his mother as his life is being drained away under the knee of a police officer who's supposed to protect and serve. We say that on the one hand that we are a society that embraces diversity, but we won't talk about critical race theory. We won't talk about the 1619 Project. And what we're talking about is American history, what actually happened in this country to millions of our ancestors. In places like Texas, what they're doing is rewriting history by saying that Black people were not brought here forcibly, that we came voluntarily, that we were essentially long distance commuters, and we came here figuring, well, you know what? We'll just get onto ships, chain ourselves into the holds of ships, and cross the Atlantic because there's got to be better work opportunities on the other side of the ocean. That too is laughable.
Could you just escort me down to the bottom of the ship?
Right.
With no bathrooms, it's okay.
Right.
I'm just going to stay on it.
Right.
Because I need to commute and get to America.
Right. And I need to be in like a 3x3 holding area, chained to the people, the brothers and sisters next to me. Yeah.
It sounds inviting.
It really does, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like the perfect cruise, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, that is what Texas wants to rewrite history to reflect. That simply slavery did not exist. That this 400-year history, this legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, it never happened. Mm-hmm. So how can we say we're going to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we won't even accept our own history? Mm-hmm. This is reality for countless Black people around the world, not just here, but around the world. Mm-hmm. This is our history. And if we can't embrace that, how do we embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion? And inclusion in what?
You see my face, right?
Right. Well, what are we being included in? And who is being allowed to sit at the table, right? Because I think that for Black and brown people in this country, we have gone retrograde. At one point, and I guess the height would be the civil rights movement, when you had people like Dr. King and Malcolm X, who were on the scene, who were advocating for us to have equality under the law. And there was some change that needed to be made. But after the death of Malcolm and Dr. King, the government began to slowly chip away at the few strides that we made. So now voting is no longer a right. But it never really was right, it was a privilege. And that privilege may be denied really. So in fact, it's being denied, going back to the 2000 election, Black people were turned away from the polls. And you saw it happen down in Georgia in the last couple of elections where Black people would hand out water because the lines were long. They had closed polling places and forced people to other polling stations where the lines would stretch around the block. So people would hand out water, sometimes food, for people standing on line. Well, Georgia says that's illegal. You can go to jail for an act of kindness. If what you want to do is provide water for another human being standing on a long line to vote, you can actually be charged. What about this diversity, equity, and inclusion is real? Someone needs to, come on the show and explain that. How we say this is the society that we are creating, yet we still have George Floyd. We still have people being denied the right to vote. And now the vestiges of the program that was called, oh boy, it's escaping me for a second. Oh, I can't think of it. Affirmative action. That's what it is. Sorry about that. Affirmative action. It whittled it down to almost nothing. Before, a certain number of people of color would be admitted to college campuses. Well, now they're saying that is unconstitutional. Again, we talk about this program or this idea, diversity, equity, inclusion, yet we say letting people of color go to college is unconstitutional. Slavery was constitutional.
Well, here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to embrace inclusion and equity. We have to be honest, right? In order for them to do that, in order for them to dismantle systemic racism and address the unequal distribution of wealth and power, education, resources, they have to be willing to relinquish their own understanding. Right? I'm not going to do that.
No. I guess it's something that will have to be grudgingly and be forced upon them. And I think that's happening only because so many, I guess, foreign governments have now come into this country and are now buying up America the way America bought up other countries. So now you have the Japanese that control some of the major structures in America, in this country. I think they own Rockefeller Center, right? Chinese buying up so many different corporations in this country. And of course, they're putting CEOs being people from China, people from Japan, African countries coming in, buying up a portion of this U.S. economy and putting Africans in charge. So, it is something that this country is accepting begrudgingly. Because you talk about when we moved here, I remember moving here and you did not see Black or brown people working anywhere.
No.
Nowhere. I guess within the last maybe 15, 20 years, well, 15, we've seen some changes where we see people of color in some key positions around this area of Northeast Pennsylvania. But before that, we knew the horror stories. In fact, the one involving your mom, a complete horror story. And, some of the players who were there during that time were taking place. You know what I mean? So, what's changing?
I don't think it's changing.
Mhm.
I think they're just more careful
Mhm.
about how to split. Even me working in government agencies, right?
Mhm.
And being in charge, they struggle with that.
Mhm.
When people come in
Oh yeah.
and they struggle with that.
Mhm.
So, you know, some don't come back. So
No, I
it is
saw.
what it is, right?
Yeah, I tell you, I saw a documentary the other day, and it's called "The School That Tried to End Racism." And there's a sister from, I believe, Philadelphia, who went to England and introduced a program where they would take children, elementary school children, and they would test them to find out if they had an unconscious bias for any particular group. And after the first round of testing, they found out that there was an unconscious bias for Caucasian people.
Mhm.
Um, the reason being, okay, is simple. The image of beauty, Caucasian woman. People in positions of power, Caucasians. People who win the wars, Caucasians. People who write history, Caucasians. So, of course, people um, identify power and wealth and beauty with Caucasians. After discussion, open discussion with children and other exercises, unconscious bias was gone by the final round of testing. Something that, now this sister had to go to England to institute this program. She's from Philadelphia, an hour and a half from here. Why didn't we do it in some of the schools here in this country? And the answer probably is that people in this country are resistant to it. And, I've heard people say that critical race theory, what it does, it blames little Caucasian children from what their ancestors did. And, the silly part is that for the people that are railing against critical race theory, they don't even know what it is. Tucker Carlson, who has a syndicated show, news show, he was asked directly, what is critical race theory? He said, I don't know. But you've been railing against it for weeks, but you don't know what you're against. You have no idea what critical race theory is. Yet, there's so many people across this country, once they hear it, they have this immediate reaction like, no way. Well, what is it you're so adamantly against? Do you even understand what it is?
They are against the thought of possibly
Mm-hmm.
if enough history, real history, is taught
Mm-hmm.
in the school. This is another generation.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason they want to say we're targeting the kids is because we're teaching the kids, right?
Right.
Because they in fact are the ones who would be responsible for relinquishing that unearned advantage
Mm-hmm.
for the next generation, right?
Right.
So that's where the fear comes in. It's like, no, we can't do that. Because let's be honest, if we had the advantage, would we want to relinquish the advantage?
We did have the advantage, right? We did for centuries, right?
No, here.
In this country, okay, no. We've never had a clear advantage here. I would like to think that some of us would think differently in terms of inclusion and equity.
Mm.
I would like to think that we would not treat others the way we were treated. I would like to think that our connection to our ancestors and our Creator would not allow us to treat others the way we were treated.
But guess what, Mom?
Mhm.
In most instances, we don't.
We don't.
We
Exactly.
don't. Black people, I'm sorry, we're not built like that.
Right.
We are the most accepting race in the barrel. Oh,
Mhm.
come on over.
Right.
Come on over. But I can remember when my kids were growing up, it was a group of, it was a small group. It was
Right.
a small group of black kids.
Mhm.
And it was like one white guy who was swore he was black.
Mhm.
And the kids would call him White Rob.
Right.
Come on, White Rob. White Rob cooked ziti in my kitchen.
Right,
He
right.
was do that with us.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do that. We are accepting and loving people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just who we are. Of course, we always have some outliers,
Right.
right? But overall, we are loving people.
And that's why I would think that we would not treat others the way we were treated. Because I mean, then we become who they are. You don't want to go from being the abused to being the abuser. So I would like to think that some of us would recognize that and say, no, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to start instituting control. We're not going to ask that information. It was done to us, but we're not going to do that. And then if you, in South Africa, where we had the apartheid system, or when black men took over power in South Africa, they didn't reinstitute apartheid. They didn't say, hey, we are now going to establish tax laws for white people to enter the major cities of South Africa. Right? That was not done. So I would like to think that, yeah, we would do and think differently. But in this country, we still are, I think, is very, very backward. As, as opposed to the rest of the world, where they don't have the same level of, I guess, maybe hysteria as it relates to people of different skin tones. Right? In America, even though in this country we just emerged from a pandemic where 5 million people died, death is equal opportunity. So is poverty. So is disease. So many of these things affect everyone regardless of your skin tone. And yet people still under belief, well, I'm better, I'm superior, based solely on the top layer of my skin, right? Um, well, if you were in a fire and your epidermis was burned off, what happens then? Are you've lost your edge of superiority, and how can we still think in the 21st century that skin color alone makes you superior? And how can we in this country where people of color had dealt with so many years of violence, so much in terms of isolation, depravity. How can we say to 11 and 12-year-olds that we are going to charge you with a hate crime, right? And maybe seek to maybe incarcerate some of these kids, right? If their white counterparts had done this, and this happened, well, throughout this year's country, it's happened multiple times, and no hate crime is canceled. In fact, sometimes no prosecution at all. What message are we sending to these students, to the black community in Springfield, Ohio, and maybe to the black community across this country?
We're sending a message that we already have.
Mm-hmm.
We already have the message. We already got the memo, right? Loud and clear. There's unequal distribution of our judicial system.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't punished the same way. The consequences and repercussions are extreme when it's us. And that's just the country that we live in. And people don't want to hear it, but it's true.
So now, you're the social worker. How do we change it? What do we do?
Come out to Project Everything on this planet.
No, that is a step in the right direction, right?
But it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that change it with action. Like we have to react. You can't be afraid to address
Mm-hmm.
all these issues. People need to make themselves again mobile. Maybe to have a voice. How many people are speaking up for these kids? Because it's like I said, I'd be willing to bet that theory is true that hurt people hurt other people.
Absolutely.
Right? So if these kids did that, as a clinician, me just looking at it, I'd be willing to put some money on the fact that they were suffering something in school and they got together and came up with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would an 11 to 12-year-old want to make a statement
Mm-hmm.
and have these kids verbalize that Black Lives Matter?
Mm-hmm.
You gotta like think.
Mm-hmm.
So how about, in addition to us thinking about how they're gonna be punished, how about there be some exploration done as to what led up to that incident?
Well, okay. I know your clinician skill. If you could speak to those students, right, both black and white students,
Mhm.
what do you think you say?
Well, I think for black kids, can I have a sidebar?
I,
Because I'm gonna tell them I'm gonna beat your ass.
oh, okay.
But I think collectively, if I were to address that, I wouldn't come with an idea or concept. I think I would probe for ideas and concepts from them to see, like how did we end up here? What happened that caused us to end up here? And like I said, I'd be willing to bet that if people start to explore and probe and really look into it, those kids, those African American kids, suffer some mistreatment by those white kids. And then again, what's the demographic in that school?
Mhm.
All these things have to be taken into account.
Mhm.
How many black kids are in that school?
Well, you brought up a good point. It should be looked at, right? And I mentioned your skills as a clinician for because you and I read the article relative to what happened, and nowhere, at least in my reading, of it, I did not see where anyone from with a clinical background was involved in this.
Well, I mean, just being fair
Mhm.
and having a little bit of knowledge about how it works in a school system. The social workers they probably talk to the kids, right? And then in addition to just talking to the kids who were involved, they probably talk to the rest of the school
Mhm.
too, because this is considered traumatic,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely.
They probably talk to the rest of the kids too. But the better question is what do they talk about?
Right. So we're assuming they had these conversations. But what I'm talking about in terms of investigation, right? They've turned this over to the district attorney's office. So are we looking here at the goal to try to understand what happened, or are we trying to understand to make sure it never happens again?
Of course they're trying to punish.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they're trying to make a statement. Of course they're trying to use them to make an example of them. Of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? They have to keep us in order, right?
Right.
And they have to start young.
Right.
Keep us in order.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they can do this now, right, they destroy them. Those kids will be destroyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self-esteem will be annihilated,
Right.
their future won't look very bright. Well, they're prosecuted for. So this is very strategic. But again, I I haven't heard anything to the tune of I haven't heard about anybody saying that the African American community wants this about what happened. We want to know the demographic in school.
I think this is something that needs to be followed up on because if you are a resident of Springfield, Ohio, and I'm talking a so-called minority in Springfield, Ohio, when you just said about sending a message, yeah, I think that sends a very clear message to the black and brown residents of Springfield, Ohio, of the disparate treatment of black and brown and Caucasian. And I think that the community should be up in arms. If we're talking about addressing this issue, there are ways to address this issue without involving the police and the district attorney. I mean, I could see if one of these children suffered significant injury, right? But I think what happened, like a kid or two may have been punched, right? We're not talking about serious bodily injury. We're talking about a slap or a punch. Should it have been done? Absolutely not. I'm not condoning violence, but it was done. No one was seriously injured, and yet we're talking about a hate crime. How far are they willing to go to send a message?
Mhm.
You know, and again, we've had situations like this throughout the history of the country, where think about it, the entire section of Greenwood, Oklahoma, was destroyed. Right, 300 people died in in that course of a couple of days. 300 people died, and the entire Greenwood section of Oklahoma was decimated. And for years, from 1950 up until maybe 5 years ago, we haven't even heard of it. It's written out of history, and not a single person was prosecuted. Not a single arrest. No one prosecuted. The only one that was arrested was a young black man who was accused of attacking women on that. And that's what started. That's what set the. That was the catalyst for this chain of events that led to the destruction of Greenwood, Oklahoma.
Well, I'm going to say this. Years ago, when my oldest son was born, there was an incident where somebody decided that he wanted to take football, that they wanted to take all of the lockers that belonged to African American players.
Mhm.
They wanted to use these lockers. And so all of the kids in the home, they complained to parents that they used to put down. Teachers came and they kind of collected them.
Mhm.
And then it was just like, okay, well, it's over.
Police were not called.
No police, of course, of course. And so the interesting part was that I went to the school for the administration, and I didn't get the answer that I wanted from the administration. And so I called in the department of safety programs
Mhm.
because that was clearly my son's safety
Mhm.
being compromised at that point. Right? And then it was addressed.
Right.
But the interesting part was that out of like 12 kids, I was the only parent that actually went and said, no, you're not going to just make this disappear. So again, like I said before, they will sweep things under the rug, but if we are verbal and we are mobile, right, then they can't sweep the rug.
I think that's something that we need to be aware of. That we have to be proactive, right? You know, to be reactive, that means, well, it happened already.
Right.
So we need to be proactive. We need to be up at the schools. We need to meet with the administrators. We need to make it clear, right, that certain things will not be tolerated. Right?
School board meeting.
School board meetings. We need to be at some of the political activities, some of those meetings, just to let you know.
PTA meeting.
Yes, we need to be at all of them so that we are familiar with the people who are teaching our children, who are shaping their minds.
And you know, Ron, and I have to say about it, it's like I do. We live in where parents are tired. They're working, people are working a lot of hours, but you have to fatigue or not. You have to like make time to show up to these different meetings, and so people see you. And guess what? I don't know what goes on now, but I can remember years ago. We didn't go. I would go to the school board meetings, and I was the only person of color
Mhm.
at the school board meeting. I went to PTA meetings. I was the only person. I was on the PTA. I was a football mom. I was the only person of color. And guess what? The African American kids were winning the football game. You know, and where were the parents to find out about how the kids were treated on the team? To find out about what was going on in the locker rooms? To find out about what was happening on the buses?
Mhm.
when they were traveling to and from the games because there was a lot of racial tension here because they weren't used to us. And we infiltrated this whole place and really fast,
Mhm.
right? So we give them that. It took some adjustment, right?
Mhm.
We have to be fair, right?
Mhm.
You living in white rural America,
Right.
right? And then here comes all of these the city, not just black people, city
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
right? So of course it took some adjusting, but the only way for us to see change, and this goes, all over the place, Oklahoma, the Poconos, Georgia, even Florida,
Mhm.
which you'd be surprised. You would think that it would be the way it is in Florida, right? But it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we have to be local and we have to be verbal and we have to join forces collectively and that our voices, that our spirit.
I don't think the time is to wait for something to happen in order to start organizing and say, okay, we're going to go there, we're going to go on, that we're going to do sit-ins and things of that nature. I think we need to be proactive and we need to be prepared for when it does happen. And we have a plan in place for these young students in Ohio. There needs to be a plan in place, right? Because realistically, the state of Ohio, I would imagine, is going to seek to make an example of these students. So I think there needs to be a plan in place. I think the word needs to get out to communities of color across this nation. I think that, the family should be working on hiring attorneys because, to have your children sit with, the police and be questioned, terrible.
Like a flashback of the Central Park trial,
Right,
right? To our
right,
kids,
yes.
right? So again, and I'm gonna be bold and say this: where's the NAACP?
I would imagine there is a chapter in Springfield, and I would hope that they are aware of this and are involved in the case, as well as any organization that, and not just concerned about black people, but concerned about children, period. Because these are all our children. These are all American children, right? These are the same children that will grow up and we'll send them off to fight a war to kill others. But, we will not protect them in their classroom. And how many school shootings have we had over the past, 15, 20 years? And, the response from Washington is just tokenism. Basically, okay, it happened. It probably won't happen again. And then when it happens again, okay, well, we'll put in a metal detector. It probably won't happen again. So we've got to do, better at protecting American children. We used to say children are our future. Now, I don't know if we can anymore. But, for these particular students in Springfield, I think that there needs to be a plan in place. Get the legal representation. Don't talk to the police, right? I mean, in terms of cooperating, you can cooperate when you have an attorney present. But to sit there with experienced investigators and 11, 12-year-old kids, they don't understand the system. In fact, most adults don't understand the criminal justice system. So they go in and, well, I'll just talk to the police and I'll clear this up. No, you won't. You only make matters worse. So if you do not have attorney representing the children, please, if you can afford it, go out and get an attorney. If you can't, won't be appointed for you. Just follow the instructions. Yeah.
What about all the sororities and fraternities, the black sororities and fraternities
Mhm.
that have members that are attorneys, that are black attorneys? You need to step up
And volunteer
and
pro bono.
volunteer
Right.
pro bono and go and see what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah, because if we don't, these kids are just going to be, up to the wolves, right? And again, these kids, what they did was, it was wrong. It was not correct. Um, I can't make excuses for them. I would really like to know what occurred, what led up to this, right? To get a better understanding. But of course, that is something that prosecution would never allow to be brought out in court. If one of these kids, these African American students, was abused in that school, and this was just an act of retaliation, the initial act would never be brought out in prosecution. They would just talk about not the cause, but the effect. Right? And that is usually what happens in courts across this country. But I just hope that these children will get the representation they need, and that the people, the minority and so-called minority residents of Springfield, will, I guess, get out there and do what is necessary to protect children.
So again, the NAACP, the sorority, the Delta, the Zetas, the Sigmas, the Kappas, who have attorneys, they need to come forward. The National Association of Black Social Workers, they need to come forward. People need to come forward. This is how economies change. That will change.
It starts with us.
And guess what? We aren't in a position anymore where we don't have doctors and lawyers and social workers.
Absolutely.
We have doctors and lawyers and social workers within our communities, and we need to step forward. We cannot be quiet and just go with the flow. We can't do that. Otherwise, why label yourself the National Association of Black Social Workers if you're not caring for the Black population?
Absolutely. And in this country, we have an epidemic of mental illness. Something that the government is not acknowledging and doing nothing, almost nothing, in terms of addressing it. So, with that said, you have Project 33, which is going to address just that. So tell us about what's planned.
Project 33 is a nonprofit organization local here, and it's our goal to create communities, not just here, but communities throughout this country who exemplify equity, education, cultural sensitivity, right? Just all the things that are needed to create a community that is in the now, for lack of a better term. So what we're going to do to try to help perpetuate that here is host this mental health here on May 6th, Ron on Main Street in Stroudsburg. And hopefully what will happen is that people struggle with mental illness, because mental illness can include depression, substance abuse, domestic violence. There are so many branches of mental health issues right now. And so we're hoping that constituents will come out and have an opportunity to participate with the agencies here in Monroe and service this population, whether it's substance abuse, behavioral health. How about this? Even soup kitchens, the food pantries, folding closets, everybody in one place so that constituents can see what agencies and services we have here. Because guess what? And I say this all the time. Some mental health is a result of what is going on with your life so far, right? So, in other words, Maslow's hierarchy and basic needs at the bottom, right? Sometimes if you can address basic needs, the issue with depression or anxiety is minimized, right? You may still have some, but it may help a lot if basic needs are met, right? So that's where the whole thing comes in with having these other people together. So just trying to get people the resources that they hopefully they'll make some connections at the fair. And we're calling the fair You. So Project 33 presents You, which is just a day for you to focus on you.
And this is going to be held where?
On Main Street Stroudsburg, the borough. Full enrollment week on May 6th, Saturday, from 12 to 6. I will be out, Juan will be out, Ted will be out.
We'll all be out there.
Genesis Radio will be out. The rest of the committee, team for Project 33 will be out. So far, it looks like Peer Mentor will be out. Peer Healing will be out. Lehigh Valley Health Network Psychiatry Department will be out. National Prevention Society Foundation will be out. A host of people will be out. Food vendors, regular vendors. So it's going to be entertainment, good food, right? Do a little shopping, you can do a little mingling, you can meet Roman right? So you can just come out and have a good time. And then again, see the resources that we have in the community. Because guess what? There were a lot of resources. There was some that I didn't even know we had until I started to look through the human service directory for this county. A lot of resources that I didn't know we had. And while we're just talking about it, I'm going to shout out and petition the churches, and I'm going to be very transparent and say they have been the least responsive to this call for action in the community. So I'm going to challenge them and charge them to step forward and, stop with the personal agendas and let's do really what Jesus did, which is service. Highways and byways, people.
Right.
That's it.
Well, it's a day that you can have some fun, but also some serious matters will be addressed. So if you are in need, in crisis, if you just need somebody to talk to, come out on these things. Participate where we all, some of the community-based organizations come out and support. That is how we work together collectively to address some of these issues that affect us all. So, this topic we talked about, diverse equity. I think we need to follow, particularly with what's going on down in the street. Because right now this isn't easy. Right? But of course, by Monday that'll be that page. It'll be forgotten. But what happened in that school will not be forgotten. The district attorney, I would imagine, if charges have not already been drawn up, they will be forthcoming. This is not something that I'm sure the European or Caucasian community in Springfield is going to tolerate. So, because they had the ear of the chief of police, the district attorney, they're going to get a response, and that response is probably going to be this hate crime. So we need to stay on top of that. If these children are going to be called for a judge, it needs to be clearly that these children are going to get, a fair, equitable trial, and they are going to be properly represented in that court. So, TP, what do you think about that, man?
Hey, man. I'm going to keep my mouth shut on this one.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's too much to be said. We ain't enough time to say it all.
Well, we're going to have to circle back on this and talk about this again. And we're going to have to, monitor what's happening out there. Hopefully somebody from Springfield, Ohio, or from the vicinity will hear podcast and will reach out to us. You can reach us here at area code 888-304-4401. Again, 888-304-4401. Call us, let us know what's going on with these kids, how the community is mobilizing, what we can do to assist. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you again, hopefully next Saturday. Y'all have a good day. I heard that on Steve Harvey